Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Yes, I say that because we record these. So sometimes people are watching on the YouTubes or wherever, and it could be evening, but for most of us, it's still morning. Welcome. Hello, hello. Glad you could be joining. Happy Friday for those of you who are joining us in real life, IRL. Hey, Brendan from Minneapolis. I said Minneapolis, sorry, Indianapolis. Hey, Chris from Chicago. I'm not on the top of my game. Zineb from Brussels. Man, I love Brussels. Lakshmi, hello, hello from H-Town. VJ from London. Hey, VJ, did you get a chance to go to Big Data London? It's the buzz of LinkedIn. Everybody's going to the Olympia in London the last 2 days. If you got a chance to go, I hope you enjoyed it. Curtis from St. Louis. Oh, bummer, VJ. No. Well, okay. Next year. Registration is free up to a certain point. If it's totally free to go, and it's totally worth it. I mean, there's some great speakers at Big Data London. Yeah, it's a little chaotic. It's a little crazy. I think last year there were 30,000 people, which is crazy to go to a data event. But if you're in London and you have an opportunity, yeah, you should definitely check it out. I was going to mention, friends, I'm not necessarily on the top of my game. I've had one heck of a busy week. I was in Germany yesterday morning. I was in Germany. I just got back late last night. I had an event. I had two events this week in Germany. The biggest one was working with a company called Bosch, and I gave a speech at a private event for Bosch, where there were several hundred people. Bosch is a really big company. I mean, you've probably maybe bought something from them. They make power drills and all sorts of tools and washer dryers and a lot of components for self-driving cars, believe it or not. They make trains, they make auto parts, just all sorts of stuff that Bosch makes. And I was there at their headquarters in Stuttgart, Germany, talking about data, which is what I always talk about. So I'm a little frazzled after a long few days of travel. Although I'm not going to complain because I had a great time with the folks at Bosch. I learned a ton from them. Actually, I went there to kind of share what I know about data, and I ended up learning more, leaving having learned a lot about what companies like Bosch are working on, some of their biggest projects, which are very, very cool. How they're solving for a few things that we're actually going to talk about today. We're going to talk about metadata management today. I use the phrase mastering metadata management, but that's what we're going to talk about, metadata. However, let's remember that this is also an Ask Me Anything. Quite obviously, maybe you registered for the event and you're accessing through our Goalcast platform, or maybe you're accessing through LinkedIn, which is cool. And if you are, if you got a question for me, let her rip. There's nothing out of bounds. There's no question too big or too small. I'll try to answer anything. And my apologies, I just tried to open my LinkedIn window and I learned that I had not muted my browser window. So if I don't get to your comments right away on LinkedIn, if I don't get to them during the conversation, Kayla does her best. Kayla's my producer, by the way, who's awesome and helps me with these events. She'll bring the questions from LinkedIn into our recording platform, which is called Goalcast. But if we don't, and I don't get to your questions on LinkedIn, forgive me, because once I get into this and start talking, it's hard to juggle, especially hard when I don't mute the LinkedIn window or the LinkedIn app. It's not an app, it's just a browser. If I don't mute the browser that LinkedIn is running on, I get a half a minute delay where I hear myself 30 seconds ago and there's multiple sound sources going on and it's chaos. So ask me anything. Ask me about metadata. Ask me about master data management. Ask me anything you want, but I may have a delayed response through the LinkedIn platform. But if you're asking on Goalcast, let her rip. Well, there's like 3 ways you can ask. A lot of people have already interacted through the chat window. VJ, Brendan, Zineb, others have interacted through the chat window. There's also a Q&A window. Let's just do everything in the chat if we can. Hey, there's Lakshmi. Glad you could attend. Implemented Profisee in 2019, 2021 in Denver. That's fantastic. Glad you could join. Let questions rip. you've got anything you want to say, if you've got a comment based on something that I share, would love to hear it. You may notice if you are a repeat visitor to the CDO Matters Live, our monthly live edition of my podcast, of our podcast, you may notice that something is a little bit different. My background is a little different. Again, that's on me. I didn't load a new virtual background. The software we use to record these sessions is like constantly changing. It's constantly changing. And when they update the software, which it seems like they do like every day, and maybe I'm just not moving fast enough, but they'll update the software and then I have to reload and re-upload all of my virtual backgrounds. And I didn't even know that there was a software update. So I'm logging into this platform with a couple minutes to spare. Shame on me. I blame my international travel, and my virtual backgrounds aren't there. So, as Kayla, my producer, will know, I was freaking out. There's no background. I was just thankful enough that I could get my reasonable quality mic working and my reasonable quality camera working so we could have this conversation. Also, those who may be extremely observant may also know I'm in a different physical environment. I'm in the middle of a massive home renovation. We have like bulldozed half of my house. There's no water, intermittent power. There are like large crews working on my home right now where my usual recording studio is. So I'm renting another house across the street from my home, which is actually kind of cool because I can be involved and make sure the contractors aren't doing dumb things. But I am in a different environment. So the lighting isn't maybe as good. The virtual background is gone. But hey, it's Friday. And we're talking data and we're talking metadata. If you have got questions, let me know. Also, hey, let me know where you're coming from. I see 27 people on our platform, which is cool. And there's probably an equal number on LinkedIn. Let me know if you've got any questions. How about, Casablanca. Casablanca MA. Murad, is that Casablanca, Morocco? Or MA is what we say Massachusetts here in the US? Morocco. Oh my God. Casablanca, I have not visited Casablanca, but I have been to Marrakesh. If anybody out there is looking for a really cool, very different vacation, Morocco is unbelievable. Marrakesh is just stunning. I definitely recommend Marrakesh. I had a wonderful vacation in Marrakesh. Amazing food, amazing scenery, amazing people. Morocco is definitely. Hey, Lee, glad you agree. Jeff is joining from Erlangen. Where's Erlangen? I was in Stuttgart yesterday morning, Jeff. I don't know where Erlangen is. But actually, I wasn't in Stuttgart. I was in a place called Ludwigsburg, which is like a suburb of Stuttgart. It's only like 10 minutes away. Oh, you're 4 hours from Stuttgart. Okay. Well, hey, you're in Germany. I was in Germany yesterday. Let's talk metadata management. I chose to talk about metadata management this week because I recently completed this book, Fundamentals of Metadata Management, from my friend, Ole, and Ole Olsen-Bagno. By the way, his name is spelled O-L-E. So many of us native English speakers will say Ole or Ola, and his name is pronounced Ole. So although he doesn't really mind if you say Ole or Ola, I had coffee with him 2 weeks ago in Copenhagen, where he lives, and we had a discussion about his book. We had a discussion about all things metadata. So I thought it was appropriate that I talk about metadata today. Where should we start? Well, let's start with the definition. We're in the business of semantics, so we like definitions. I don't get too hung up on the data or on the definition of metadata. Metadata is data about data. I know that sounds pithy, and I know that sounds high level and borderline maybe a little platitudinous, but I think it's useful. One way to look at metadata is it is the column headers in a spreadsheet. Okay, so if you just think about a spreadsheet and you've got headers on a spreadsheet, that's the metadata. The stuff in the actual values in the cells, that's data, right? Metadata is the column headers. If you've got other helpful metaphors that you've used to help describe metadata, maybe you're trying to describe it to a friend or a colleague or somebody on the business side, if you found something that's useful, hey, share that in the chat. Share that in the chat on LinkedIn, or share that in the chat here. Because when it comes to metadata, I haven't heard anything that I really object to from a definition perspective, because it's really flexible. It's data about data. I like the metaphor of the headers on a spreadsheet, right? It is the data that describes other data. It is also the foundation of, I would argue, a data model. We're going to talk a little bit more about how metadata is foundational to a lot of different things. But at a high level, that's what I think the definition of metadata is. Also, by definition, metadata is inherently, when you're talking about metadata management, and when you're talking about metadata, typically it is naturally duplicated, right? The source system, whether that's a CRM or an ERP, will be capturing data. When it comes to metadata management, typically what we are doing is actually replicating that. We're going to replicate all of that metadata. We're going to replicate the column headers, and we're going to put those into metadata management hubs, typically, right? Because metadata, as Ol would tell you in his book, he does a great job of highlighting this in his book. Metadata exists naturally all over the organization, and it is naturally compiled in a lot of different systems. For example, ServiceNow, an IT service management platform. That's one of many that lives outside of the data and analytics world that is managing metadata. Maybe you're managing a content management system for a marketing organization, or maybe your marketing organization has a content management system. Typically in these content management systems, you'll things like images and text descriptions, marketing collateral, right? Where marketing teams are creating maybe even FAQs for customer service, right? Content management systems have metadata. Knowledge management systems have metadata. CRM systems have metadata. Metadata is literally everywhere across the organization. And when we try to manage it, right, when we want to manage that in a consolidated way, when we want to know what's out there, and at a very, very high level, metadata management to me, kind of the base level of the problem that metadata management is solving is understanding what's out there, right? What is out there? So inherent to metadata management, we go and collect snippets of information about what is out there, and we try to put those into some idea of a centralized hub. Doesn't have to be centralized. Ola will tell you inherently all organizations are decentralized, because the stuff that we're managing in a data and analytics role, there's often metadata that is completely outside of those systems. And Ola would argue that it's impossible, or maybe better stated, a fool's errand, maybe, to try to have centralized metadata management. I'm not sure I fully agree with that. There are economies of scale that exist through hub architectures and trying to put everything into one system. I think the key challenge there is not a technical challenge. That's not a check. Going and collecting metadata is not that hard. The hard part is governance. What happens when you go and collect metadata from around the organization and you put that in a metadata management repository, also known as a data catalog, right? Also known as a data governance tool. There are multiple names for this software where we collect metadata, right? I think the most common one would be a data catalog, right? The challenge is not the fact that metadata exists all over the place, and it does. There's nothing inherently wrong with trying to put all of that metadata into a single repository, like a data catalog. Maybe pick one, it doesn't matter. Like a Microsoft Purview, like an Atlan, like an Elation, like a Calibra, right? They're all fine. They all work. They're all great tools. I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong or inherently inefficient with trying to put all of that metadata into one place. I think the challenge is governance. That's what I think the challenge is, because what happens when you put all of that data into one place and you have overlaps, right? What happens, right? This is where we start to get into the territory of things like semantic layers, which are built to help you link like concepts together at a schema level or a table level, or maybe even a database level, but more appropriately, I think, at a schema level. What happens when you load metadata from a CRM and you see customer, then you load data from a marketing automation system and you see prospect. And then you load metadata from ITSM, like a ServiceNow, and you see account, right? And you may be able to figure out that these things are all conceptually related, right? This is starting to get into ontologies, and I'm going to talk in semantics, and I'm going to talk about that more in a bit. But I think the challenge of centralized patterns of metadata management is that when you start putting all of this stuff into one bucket, you naturally start to see overlaps where you're like, what is this? Are they the same? And are they not the same? Semantic layers will help us link all of these things together, right? To logically link them together. MDM platforms will help us understand if Acme Inc. and Acme Co. is one thing or two things, right? And this is the key difference. This is one of the key differentiators of MDM and why I think MDM will remain a critical enabling capability of most modern data infrastructures, is that as a semantic layer, right, or knowledge graph, right, will allow you to link concepts together ontologically, right? That's an ontology is a linking of like concepts, right, within an organization. It'll allow you to link these things conceptually, but even if you link account to customer, you still don't know if Acme Inc. and Acme Co. are the same thing. That's the role that MDM will play in this evolving semantic layer. It will help you understand, disambiguate between Acme Inc. and Acme Co. So I was on a little bit of a rant there talking about centralization versus decentralization. Ola is a huge believer. He's a huge believer in more decentralized patterns, right? He was a believer in the data mesh. I'll give him credit. He's been consistent on that. I have my problems with the data mesh. This isn't a discussion about the data mesh. This is a discussion about metadata management. But one of his points is impossible to argue with. One of Ola's points in his book is that today, in reality, metadata management is highly, highly decentralized for whatever reason, right? Because we can't agree on governance, because our organizations are inherently federated, our business operating models are inherently federated, whatever the reason is. What Ola would say is that metadata exists in a highly decentralized way today, right? It's all over the place. And as much as we think that it's all going to live in one catalog, we may even go and deploy Atlan, Alation, Calibra, whatever. And we may think that we're managing all of our metadata when in reality, we're not. And I agree with that reality. That is absolutely true. That is absolutely true. So what he kind of acknowledges is that, hey, here's the reality. It is highly decentralized by nature for whatever reason. It's decentralized. And we should acknowledge that and build an architecture that acknowledges that. He calls it the metagrid. Now, when I kind of interrogate the metagrid, what I see in essence, and I don't want to oversimplify this, and I don't, but I think it's a useful way to think about it. What I see when I think about the metagrid as described in Ola's book is in essence, and I'm not trying to oversimplify, and I'm not trying to negate the value that would be here, but what I see is a series of point-to-point integrations. Point-to-point integrations, where what Ola advocates is that instead of having giant monolithic one-size-fits-all data catalogs, one-size-fits-all metadata management repository, what he is saying is that we need to find a way to link them where appropriate. One way to think about this perhaps would be to draw a Venn diagram, right? To draw a Venn diagram, a giant Venn diagram where each circle represents one repository of metadata. And I think if you did that, what you would start to see is that there are most certainly areas of overlap. Great example would be a CRM system and an ITSM system like a ServiceNow. There is most certainly customer-related data sitting in ServiceNow, right? This is how you ultimately you want to have configuration items, CI, configuration items, all tie all the way at the lowest level to a host or a server or a piece of physical infrastructure in your network, and ultimately tie that back to a customer so that you know if you've got a server outage, which customers are impacted. So there is most certainly customer data that can be managed in ServiceNow, for example, generally outside of a data and analytics function. They're living living in an IT function almost exclusively. But if you drew this Venn diagram, right, of the entire organization, if you had a magic lens that would allow you to see all of the metadata somehow, some way, let's just imagine we're omniscient, right? And we can see all the metadata, and then we just plotted it in essence on a graph. What I think Ol would argue is that when the systems overlap, like a CRM and an ITSM like ServiceNow, for example, or an ERP would be another good example. That's probably one where there'd be 3 areas of overlap. I think what Ol would advocate as a part of his metagrid architecture is that you have an integration between those systems where there is sharing of metadata between those systems. We're going to talk about why that's important in a little bit. I'm going to take a breath. I'm going to look at and see if there's any comments or questions, but the evolving field of metadata management is critical, right? There's a lot of people out there, including my dear friend, Juan Cicada. By the way, if you don't follow Juan, who was at Data.World, now he works for ServiceNow, speaking of ServiceNow. When it comes to metadata management, and one of the kind of preeminent thought leaders around metadata management, Juan Cicada is most certainly one of them, as is Ol. I've been talking about his book. It's critical. Juan will say, one of Juan's favorite sayings is metadata management is now a first-class citizen, suggesting it wasn't before. But what does Juan mean, and what do others mean when it comes to metadata management being a first-class citizen? Sounds kind of lofty, but I'll tackle that in a little bit. But let me look at some of the messages. From Christopher, our data governance team is very small, one-person shared manager. Possibly not a fair question for this tackling better metadata management governance with this size team. Oh, you can team of 1, team of 2, team of 3. All the things that I would argue, I would share here, I think are relevant. One of the things that I just shared that I think would be relevant for you, Christopher, is the fact that not all metadata is created equally. I mentioned MDM is in essence metadata management. Master data management is metadata management. So if you're a team of 1 or 2 or 3, right, what you need to do is prioritize, right? With a small team, you can't look at all data across the organization. You just can't. You're not going to be able to. So the question then becomes, how do you prioritize? Well, conceptually, you do it through that graph that I was talking about, that Venn diagram that I was talking about. I would start prioritizing on the metadata that matters the most, which is inherently going to be master data, because it's the data that is shared everywhere across the organization. That customer, asset, supplier, location, right? These things, master data is inherently metadata. You cannot extract them. However, when you start looking at record values, we could argue that is actual data, not metadata, but the attributes of a master record most certainly is metadata, right? Customer name, address, SIC code, NAICS code, anything, right? That's more of a B2B example, but attributes of a customer, that's metadata. That's metadata. So not all data is created equally. When it comes to metadata management, I would work backwards from the reports that matter the most in your organization. Work backwards from the reports that matter the most. If there is only one report, Christopher, that you and your team could improve, if you just picked one, right? And maybe it's 3, there's 4, there's 5, right? To improve the quality, to improve the consistency, right? To improve the usage of those insights for your key executives. If there was only one, find that report and then work backwards from there. Use that as a way to put a scope around your efforts related to master data management, data quality, metadata management. Work backwards from that report, because in theory, that report is the most important one to your organization. Those KPIs are the most important ones to your organization. Do not fall prey, Christopher, to thinking that you need to focus on a domain like customer, like account, like supplier, right? Or even a business domain like sales, finance, marketing, right? There's a strong allure there. And we talk about this when it comes to MDM all the time. Most people try to focus on a domain, but your business doesn't care about domains. Your business cares about that report or those reports or those KPIs being right. Can I make an informed business decision based on the data that I'm seeing in some of these reports? So instead of looking at a domain, right, work backwards, maybe from a set of critical KPIs and start applying practices related to master data management, metadata management, data quality to make sure that that one report, or 4 or 5 or 6, depending on what you're able to support, focus there. That's what I would focus on. So, not all metadata is created equally. Not all master data is created equally. Some are going to matter a lot more than others. And that's a great way to start prioritizing. Hey, Don from Portland, City of Roses. Glad you could make it. Murad, which criteria should we take in consideration to prioritize? I just answered that, I think. Work backwards from reports. Now, that's a bit of a cheat. And what do I mean by a cheat? In theory, what you want to focus on is the data that is driving the most value to the organization. Okay, right? The insights that are driving the most value, the KPIs that are driving the most value, the data that is driving the most value. In theory, we as data practitioners would know what the ROI is from a focus on, let's say, better data quality related to your customer data. That's the theory. The reality is that most companies are not tracking the business value of data. So if I was to put on purely an academic hat, right, and if I was putting on my Gartner consultant, my Gartner analyst hat, well, you need to prioritize based on business value. That is a true statement. It is a 100% true statement. But the fact is, Murad and Christopher and others, chances are we really don't know and don't have any metrics that say, okay, this report is way more valuable than this one because this one drives 10 million euros in sales and this one drives 4 million euros in sales. I wish we had that data, but most of us don't. So a good proxy would be to just look at the reports that are used. Look at the KPIs that are used the most. Go talk to people in sales or in finance or in marketing. Hey, what are your most important KPIs? The question you can ask is here's a good question. Here's a really good question. How, insert person's name here, VP of marketing, VP of procurement, VP of sales, how, VP of sales, are you measured? What metric is used to determine your bonuses? Right? If you can get to that level of comfort, and I've done this, I have done this, asked this hard question. What are the metrics that you care about the most? And even one step further is, how are you measured? How is your performance measured? If you can figure out how some of the key executives in your business functions, sales, marketing, finance, supply chain, whatever, if you can figure out how they're measured, right? What the KPIs are that influence their paycheck, focus there. You become a rock star. You can become an absolute rock star. If you improve, for example, a sales forecasting metric, most sales leaders, will be compensated somehow, some way related to the accuracy of their forecast, because every single business wants accurate sales forecasts, right? This is the forward looking. Here's what we think. Here's the money we think we're going to make, right? Businesses run looking forward. Their valuations certainly are based on looking forward. Sales forecasts, or just even revenue, right? Revenue by territory, revenue by account executive, whatever that is. Those are the metrics that are going to matter the most. And if you can improve the reliability, their accuracy of that data by focusing on better metadata management, by focusing on better data quality, by focusing on master data management, you can do that for one of those business executives, you're a rock star. You are now their favorite person ever, right? If you can expose data related to opportunities to sell more, you're going to be a rock star. I love, in absence of having clear priorities provided by the business, in absence of having some PMO that may actually tell you what is, higher priority than another, all else being equal, I'd be looking at sales. There isn't a company out there that doesn't want to sell more, right? So in absence of having guidance around what matters, in absence of having a business strategy, right? I used to hear this all the time as a Gartner analyst. They say, well, we don't have a business strategy. I doubt it. You probably do. It's probably just not communicated very well. But that aside, Sales is a great place to focus. Sales is a great place to focus. Murad, what is you starting with data classification as input, then prioritize which domain? Well, Murad, the challenge, what you're suggesting, and I used to see this all the time, and maybe you're not suggesting this, but when it comes to classification, this is metadata management, classifying data, tagging data, classifying data, understanding what's out there. I would argue that if you take a bottoms-up approach, which is an inventory-based approach, okay, let's go find it all. Let's go find it all. Let's go find what we've got out there. I've said this before on other live events, but I'll say it again because it's relevant. When I was an analyst at Gartner, I used to talk to CDOs all day, every day. And here's a story that I would hear that it was very, very common, is that I would ask, hey, what are you going to focus on? What are you going to be doing? Well, I think we need to focus on A, B, and C, whatever it is. But what we really need to focus on first is doing a data inventory. I need to find what's out there. And logically, this kind of makes sense, right? Logically, it's like, oh, okay, can't measure it, can't manage it. We need to go figure out what's out there. And I would hear this all the time, right? And often it was in the context of MDM versus data catalogs, right? CDOs would acknowledge that they didn't have a single version of the truth, that they didn't have a customer 360, that they struggled to create customer or supplier 360s. They would acknowledge that. And I would argue most companies still do, by the way. They would acknowledge that would be a great opportunity to have a customer 360. But what I heard all the time was, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to try to solve for the customer 360 because I first need to go figure out what's out there. And I'm going to go do this full inventory. And I'd say, hey, there's a different way to attack this problem. You should think about it. No, we're going to go do an inventory. 6 months would go by and those CDOs would call me back. And I would say, hey, how's that data inventory going? And here's what I would hear. What I would hear is, well, we think we're about 50 to 60% of the way there. I'm struggling getting access to a lot of the databases out there. I don't know what I don't know. I know there's a lot of shadow IT. I know there's a lot of data out there that I don't have my arms around yet. We're trying to do business. We're building a business glossary. We went and bought a data catalog. We spent a ton of money on a data catalog. We think we may have about 50% of the data identified. We've got about 20 to 30% of it actually, those key terms defined. We've got a number of those actually glossaried. We're building a glossary. We're thinking about an enterprise-wide hierarchy and maybe even an ontology, but there's still so much data that's out there and we don't know. But my senior management is getting very, very anxious, wants to see results. I'm being pushed to focus on AI, and I've still only got a half of my data catalog done. What should I do? I'd hear that over and over and over and over and over again. I'd hear it all the time. To me, this is a function of this bottoms-up, inventory-based approach to metadata management, where the yardstick is, do we find all the data? Instead, what I recommend and what I told CDOs every day is, instead of a bottom-up approach to metadata management and data quality and MDM, by the way, instead of that bottom-up approach, that inventory-based approach, start from a problem. Start from the top. That's what I mean by taking a KPI-driven approach, or an outcome. A better way to say it is an outcome-driven approach. Start with a problem. Hey, Chief Revenue Officer, what's your biggest pain? What's the problem, right? How could we help with better data? Oh, I need a customer 360 to help us better manage our accounts, right? To better manage our customer service processes. Right? That is actionable. You can put a fence around that. And maybe it's not even a 360. Maybe it's a 280. Maybe it's just a 180. Maybe we acknowledge, hey, we're not going to go find all the data because we don't even know what's out there. It may be out there. But what we're going to do is we're going to put a fence around it. We're going to try to build as much of a customer 360 as we can in the next 6 months. And chances are, even a 280 or a 180 is still going to be valuable to your customers, to your stakeholders, to that chief revenue officer. When you take that kind of top-down, outcome-driven approach, right? Go find data in your CRM. Go find data in your ERP. Go find data in your ITSM. Go find data in Adobe or whatever it is. Trust me, my friends, I guarantee you will intuitively know where at least 70 to 80% of that data is, of the customer data. Pareto principle is going to apply. 80% of that data is going to be in 20% of the systems, and you already know what those systems are. The remaining 20% of the data is going to be out there. It's all out there. And this is one of the reasons why I disagree a little bit. That's not the right word when it comes to OL and fundamentals of metadata management. Because I would argue that you can centralize on the data that matters the most. That 80% of the value from 20% of the data that is sitting in the systems that I just mentioned: ERP, CRM, ITSM, content management systems, knowledge management systems, marketing automation systems, ERP systems, procurement systems, like the Workdays and PeopleSofts of the world. What else is there? I mean, there's onesie twosies out there. I'm sure, like marketing teams have got like 15 different marketing automation tools. They've got like MailChimps and all sorts of other stuff, but that's noise. That's noise, right? We don't need to go find it all. We don't, not to drive value. So when it comes to metadata management or master data management or even data quality, focus on the stuff that matters the most. Solve a specific problem, or solve 80% of a problem. Solve 70% of a problem. Still going to be 0% of a problem. So that's what I'd be focused on. Hopefully that makes sense. Let me scroll back up to some of these questions. Zineb asked about a metadata management strategy. I basically gave you the secrets to a metadata management strategy just now. Focus on outcomes. Take an MVP, minimum viable product approach. Do multiple releases. Be agile. Solve one problem and then solve another, and then solve another, and then solve another. If you keep doing that, over time, I don't know what the time frame is, a year, 2 years, maybe a little longer, you'll probably end up having 80% of your data cataloged naturally, right? But you'll have solved 8 or 9 problems. What I saw is that people said, CDO said, I need to go find everything before I can do anything. Before I can attack data quality, before I can attack MDM, before I can do a mesh, before I can do anything, I need to go find everything. Logically attractive, but it is just a massive resource suck. It is major time. You'll never find it all. You'll never get access to it all. You're going to hit a lot of political barriers, all sorts of stuff. Solve a specific problem and take a very MVP approach where it's not 100% of a problem. 70% of a customer 360 is still better than 0% of a customer 360. That's why I was calling it a 280 or maybe even a 180. What I just described is kind of to me, Zineb, is the foundation of a metadata management strategy. Catalog, classify, inventory data, tag, whatever words you want to use, profile, all the processes that are involved in understanding what metadata is out there. Do that to solve a problem. Right? Or to improve certain KPIs. If I mean, all else being equal, to improve certain KPIs. Looking at other questions. Making sure I want to answer. Tell me, Curtis, tell me how you measure me, and I'll tell you how I'll respond. Isn't that also like a Buffett quote, or is that tell me how they're measured, and I'll or tell you how they're paid, and I'll tell you how they're measured, or something like that. I think there's a Warren Buffett quote out there, Curtis, that is also something similar to that. Don, quick wins. Drive buy-in. Absolutely agree. Start with the problem statement. Here. Couldn't agree more. What's the problem? My most common solution is to enable higher quality campaigns directly impact systems. Most sales and marketing systems don't talk to each other. Correct. Totally agree. It's side issue. I mean, marketers have been complaining about a lack of integration for years. But we also don't do each other a lot of favors when we go buy systems and we acquire infrastructure like candy. Right. So, I mean, I'm not pointing fingers and I'm not blaming, but I mean, marketers, there is a lack of integration across systems. Absolutely correct. It's been a problem for a long, long time. Also absolutely correct. But marketers love to go buy new stuff. They're constantly buying new stuff. Like at Profisee, we have a ton. We have a ton of marketing tools. I've even lost track of the names of these tools and what they do. And we're not even that big of an organization. So when you think about a really, really big organization, yeesh. Kayla, read it on this. It is. Oy. Sorry, Kayla. I'm trying to get to the question. Is there master data? Could you speak to the nuance? Metadata versus master data for Rita on LinkedIn. The difference is really kind of nuancy. Metadata is the labels of a master data record. So, customer name, address, all the attributes, that's master data. The values, what is described within each of those cells, right? So address, SIC code, NAIC code, you name it. The values of those individual attributes, that's the data. Master data is most certainly, this, and master data and metadata are the same when it comes to master data. I would argue. I mean, so it's a little nuancy. I was on a panel once at a big event a couple of years ago. It was a Dataversity event, and I was speaking on a panel, and people were talking about metadata, and I said, I don't really honestly draw that much distinction between metadata and data. And there was like this, and I know that I am today for the sake of conversation and making sure that that we move the conversation along. But I don't think we necessarily need to get that hung up on it. But they technically, I suspect they're different. If we looked at our beloved DMBOK, Data Management Book of Knowledge, I'm extremely familiar with Chapter 12, which is the chapter that deals with metadata management. I'd like to see a lot more there. In the next version of the DMBOK that they're working on now, version 3, I've been asked to participate, and I think I will. I don't have a ton of time, so I'm not sure that I will actually be one of the contributing authors, but I'll at the very least going to be interviewed for my perspectives. When it comes to metadata management, the DMBOK is one area where we need to definitely pull up our socks. We need to do a little bit of better there. There's way too much focus in the DMBOK around things like sources and types of metadata management. The DMBOK goes into like business metadata versus IT metadata versus transactional metadata. I'm just like, who cares? I'm like, this is not value add. Yeah, there's a lot of different types of metadata. Why should I care? There's a ton of space in the DMBOK allocated to different kind of metadata management architectures. And I basically just described two of them, right? Centralized patterns versus decentralized patterns. That's it, right? And you could have a data catalog with a fancy UI, or there is no data catalog with no fancy UI. But for most organizations out there, this is going to be a data catalog. It's going to have a UI. It's going to have some sort of queryability of that data, some sort of search for that data, probably some marketplace functionality, right? To be able to surface even data products that are existing in the data catalogs. But DMBOK's been so much real estate related to these various architecture types. And again, I just don't think it's that helpful, particularly based on some of the things that I'm going to talk about next, which is, why? Why is Juan Cicada talking about how metadata management is now a first-class citizen? I'm going to talk about that a little bit, but I want to make sure I get to some questions. My interface, you can't see it here, but where are my questions? I have this tiny box that is like this big, and it's impossible to read comments. It's almost impossible to read the comments on this platform. So my apologies. Brendan, I'm building. Yeah, I need to find a better way to get at these. Metadata organisms, most priority data sets to help build the foundations for these. Best way to capture and store business metadata to optimize AI. Best way well, there's multiple ways. And maybe this is a good segue into the things that I'm going to be talking about now. There's multiple ways to kind of store this data. The common way would be in a relational data store sitting in a data catalog. That's the most common way. But there are other ways to do it, including knowledge graphs, which I think if you are working at a company and you're not talking about knowledge graphs and you don't have a knowledge graph, you need one. You absolutely positively need one. Why? Well, Kayla's telling me how to see things, but press the usually underneath the emoji screen to see questions in a bigger screen. Oh, how do I do that? Underneath the, oh, wait. Oh, bingo. Kayla, nailed it. I'm having a senior moment, but yes. Okay, thank you. And now I can see my comments a little bit better. Anyway, I think Don had a question about various ways to capture and store business metadata to optimize AI. Okay, that last bit, optimize AI. This is where I want to go for the last 15 minutes of conversation because can't not talk about AI. Knowledge graphs. You need a knowledge graph. Why? The short answer is AI. One of my friends and one of the smarter people in the space, her name is Jessica Talisman. And I've had her on the CDO Matters podcast. So check out her episode if you want to learn more. But Jessica tells this story related to something she calls the ontology pipeline. And what we need to do as data professionals when it comes to metadata management is that we need to, first of all, formalize metadata management practices, right? But a good way to think about metadata management through the lens of AI is that I view metadata as it will be, in essence, the connective tissue. And I love that phrase. It will be the connective tissue between relational data stores and non-relational data stores. Let's just call them unstructured data. I don't want to get in an argument about semi-structured and JSON and XML and whether, okay, all data inherently has structure. I don't want to get into that conversation. Let's do it on LinkedIn, where people love to quibble about whether or not there is even such a philosophical thing as unstructured data, because all data inherently has structure. Fine. There's relational data stores, and then there's everything else. And Jessica tells an important story here. My friend Juan tells an important story here. Why is it important? It's important because the connective tissue between these sources of data is the metadata. It is the metadata. And more importantly, particularly to make a connection between structured data and some concept of unstructured insight, the bridge that we need to build is one of context, right? What Gen AI, I should be correct. What Gen AI wants is text. It wants stories. It wants a narrative. It is built on and optimized by text. The intersection of a row and a column has no context. It is largely useless to an LLM, yet we've got all of this data sitting in relational data stores, right? What we need to do from a metadata management perspective is start to understand the context related to all of our unstructured data. That will be the bridge. That will be the connective tissue that will enable us for that structured data to be more useful, to start to look a little less structured. How will we do that? A basic approach would be to run a knowledge graph to create sets of triples, right? Simple 3-word sentences. Malcolm buys product. Malcolm lives Florida, right? Simple triples, right? That in aggregate can start to tell a story, right? That aggregate is the knowledge graph, right? When you can start to look across multiple sources of metadata. This is why the metagrid is important. This is why having a single store of metadata, this is why getting your hands around all this metadata is important, because it's going to start to reveal more of a narrative. When we do that, we will have useful information sitting in relational data stores because we'll be able to apply the context that LLMs need to start making sense of all of that data, right? So metadata is literally the foundational core sitting underneath all of this. What Jessica Talisman would say, what she calls that is the ontology pipeline. And the ontology pipeline roughly goes like this. You have metadata, okay? Metadata, all the data about data. Then you've got definitions or key terms of that metadata, right? And we define things all the time. We define customer, we define asset, we define location, we define all this. You can't build a data model without a definition, right? But we have the key definitions. From there, we build glossaries. How does the business describe these things? From there, we build a thesaurus. Relationships. How do things relate to other things? This is like this. Customer is like account. Customer is like prospect, A thesaurus thesauruses, sorry guys, allows us to kind of understand some of the things that link things together conceptually. From there, we can build taxonomies. Taxonomies and hierarchies describe physical relationships between things, right? Think of, plants or animals and the taxonomies that exist, right? Maybe even a SIT code or a NAICS code. Logical / physical relationships between things, right? These would be the typical joins in our relational tables. Okay. But from there, the next jump is to an ontology. The ontology is a conceptual map, how things are conceptually related to each other. An example of that would potentially be I'm conceptually related to photography, right? Because I'm a photography nut, right? But how you link like concepts together, right? These things together form what Jessica would call the ontology pipeline. Why is this important? You need all of that. You need to draw these connections in order for relational data to be used at scale by LLMs within your organization, I would argue. And we need to go the other way. So it's not just one way, but I would argue we need to go the other way. We need to be able to go from highly unstructured data like text, and we need to be able to apply structure to that data, right? There's a lot of different ways to do this. There's chunking, vectorizing the data through embeddings. That's a way. AI, I think, will increasingly be used to help do this, to help classify unstructured data, to help tag unstructured data at scale. But we need to be able to go both of those directions. One direction enables AI, Gen AI. The other direction enables classical BI. There will still be a need, particularly through a compliance and audit and regulatory lens, there will still be a need, I would argue, to apply traditional BI to a lot of this unstructured data. I think compliance are going to drive most of those requirements there. Guys, sitting under all of it is metadata. All of it. When we do this, we're not only going to enable AI at scale, right? We're not only going to enable AI at scale, but what I think we're really going to enable is what my friends at Gartner would say, we can start activating metadata. What does that mean? Well, historically, metadata has been a snapshot in time, right? Metadata has been the click, here's what we've got, here's all the tags, here's where things reside, here's some related terms, here are our business glossaries, here's our definition, but it's this snapshot in time. If you start to look at these things through more of a time series lens, and if you start to look more holistically across all of this metadata, when you maybe even fold in insights from transactional data, I think what you start to get to is what I think could best be described as business observability. Yes, we do data observability today, but we do it in very, very limited scopes. Check out the podcast that I recorded and I released it a couple of weeks ago with Bar Moses. Bar is the CEO of Monte Carlo, one of the biggest data observability platforms out there. But if we can do observability to pipelines, right, and if we can start to predict when pipelines are going to fail, right, we will be able to do the exact same thing with business processes. Again, the connective layer here, my friends, is going to be that metadata. Knowing that account is conceptually linked to prospect, which is conceptually linked to person, which is conceptually linked to, who knows, party, right? That's your ontology, right? Knowing all these things are linked together. When you layer in AI, right, which is really good at pattern recognition, I think we will start to be able to get to a point where we in the data and analytics function, using metadata as the foundation, will start to be able to tell our businesses how they can optimize. Right? I think it's going to start to look a little bit like business observability, but instead of looking at and understanding at why things failed, we can start looking at the things like what's needed to have them be optimal. Right? We'll start to be able to do more adaptive governance. Well, we will know this quality is good enough. This is not good enough. Right? We'll be able to kind of monitor our businesses through this metadata enabled semantic layer, and yes, what I just described, ontologies, taxonomies, MDM, even MDM, all of these things together is something that I call a next-gen semantic layer. All the things that I just described, right? Those hierarchies, the ontologies, all the enabling capabilities, even some form of data stewardship. Yes, even some form of data stewardship, because even knowledge management systems need stewardship. Ontologies need stewardship. They will. So all of these things are going to be enabled by metadata management. But where we're going, I think, is this idea of business observability. That's what Gartner would call activation of metadata, right? I like business observability better, but Gartner likes to have these, nice terms and, kitschy terms and say, okay, we're going to activate it. That's a very marketing centric term. Marketers love the word activate. It's okay. It's fine. Conceptually, that's what I see coming. And that's why metadata management matters. And this is why we need to start mastering it. So I suspect there are comments that I didn't get to. Hortensia, my goodness, what a great question. Any tips on how to avoid seeing data governance as an area that hinders, controls, or delays management? At the risk of sounding like I'm selling, I'd check out my book. I wrote an entire book called the Data Hero Playbook, and it talks about the things that we need to do, both at an individual level and at a business level, to make the jump from governance as the data police to governance as a business enabler. And a lot of that has to do with our mindset. Absolutely, it has to do with our mindset. The short answer to that question, Hortensia, is we need to start valuing. We need to start putting value and understanding the value of the solutions that we provide. Because I think if we did, we could actually prove to the business that governance is actually enabling value, like real revenue, right? The lines that we paint on the street make sure that people don't drive into each other. That's valuable, right? Even if that value is simply what is known as an opportunity cost, right? We didn't get sued. We didn't break the law. That's valuable. And those things can be measured. So the shortest answer to your question, Hortensia, is we need to start measuring the value of the things that we do. Hard to do, but not impossible. I would recommend, hey, check out my book. I share some insights there. But I think there was one more question, Caleb, that you had asked earlier, but I couldn't say. Ashutosh on LinkedIn asks, how are you looking at metadata management role within AI adoption, which is crazily happening? Yeah, I just described it. I hope I described it. Metadata management, I think, is going to be critical to enabling us to use our legacy data stores, all the relational databases, CRM, ERP, all the stuff that we've been doing. I think metadata management will be critical to enabling us to use LLMs to extract insights from those platforms, right? Yes, there are copilots. There's a Power BI copilot. I think that's helpful. But ultimately here, I think what we want to be able to do is to build reasonably customized solutions, custom SLM, small language models internally, where we turn those small language models on our data, on our transactional data, on our master data, on our CRM data, right? In ways that are meaningful and drive competitive differentiation for us. So I think metadata management is literally, that's why Juan, my buddy Juan, says it's a first-class citizen. It is the connective tissue between the world of BI and AI. That's why I think it's important. All right, guys, we're getting to the end of our time. Hey, if you joined, thank you. I hope you got some value out of this. A few things. If we're not connected on LinkedIn, we need to be connected on LinkedIn. Please connect with me on LinkedIn. You can send me these questions anytime you want. I get a lot of LinkedIn spam, so if I don't respond quickly, forgive me. We do this the third Friday of every month. Check this out. We do the podcast every 2 weeks. CDO Matters, we're pushing out a new episode of the podcast every 2 weeks. Of course, I wrote a book. I would be thrilled if you checked out my book, the Data Hero Playbook, available through Amazon. It's currently on sale. Hey. This Thursday, lastly, this coming Thursday, is Profisee's third annual Data Hero Summit. We do a full day conference. It's virtual and it's free. Quality of speakers at this event are unbelievable. We'll have Tom Redmond speaking. Tom is known as the Data Doc, is one of the preeminent voices in data quality. I will be speaking. Karthik Ravindran, who is a general manager at Microsoft, who knows data catalogs about as well as anybody on the planet, he's going to be speaking. That's just a small subset of the people who are speaking. Check out the Data Hero Summit this Thursday. Go to Profisee.com for more information. Free event. You won't regret it. It's a day well spent. Hey, everybody. Thanks for coming out today. So good to see everybody, and we'll see you again in another month. Thanks for joining. Bye for now.